Hey guys, welcome to another installment of The Tale of Despereaux. When we left off yesterday, Roscuro had gone upstairs. We had actually kind of taken a step back in time, and it tells us about when Roscuro went upstairs in the castle and had gone into the banquet hall where a party was taking place. And he fell from a chandelier into the queen's soup. So this is chapter 21, and it's called The Queen's Last Words. The queen loved soup. She loved soup more than anything in the world except for the Princess P and the king. And because the queen loved it, soup was served in the castle for every banquet, every lunch, and every dinner. And what soup it was! Cook's love and admiration for the queen and her plate moved the broth that she concocted from the level of mere food to high art. On this particular day, for this particular banquet, Cook had outdone herself. The soup was a masterpiece. A delicate mingling of chicken, watercress, and garlic. Roscuro, as he surfaced from the bottom of the queen's capacious bowl, couldn't help taking a few appreciative sips. "Lovely," he said, distracted for a moment from the misery of his existence. "Delightful." "See?" shouted P. "See?" She stood. She pointed her finger right at Roscuro. "It's a rat! I told you that it was a rat. He was hanging from the chandelier, and now he is in Mama's soup." The musicians stopped playing their guitars. The jugglers stopped juggling. The noble people stopped eating. The queen looked at Roscuro. Roscuro looked at the queen. Reader, in the spirit of honesty, I must utter a difficult and unsavory truth. Rats are not beautiful creatures. They're not even cute. They're really rather nasty beasts, particularly if one happens to appear in your bowl with soup, with pieces of watercress clinging to his whiskers. There was a long moment of silence, and then Roscuro said to the queen, "I beg your pardon." In response, the queen flung her spoon into the air and made an incredible noise, a noise that was in no way worthy of a queen, a noise somewhere between the neigh of a horse and the squeal of a pig, a noise that sounded something like this. And then she said, "There's a rat in my soup!" The queen was really a simple soul, and always her whole life had done nothing except state the overly obvious. She died as she lived. "There is a rat in my soup," were the last words that she uttered. She clutched her chest and fell over backward. Her royal chair hit the floor with a thump, and the banquet hall exploded. Spoons were dropped. Chairs were flung back. "Save her!" thundered the king. "You must save her!" All the king's men ran to try and rescue the queen. Roscuro climbed out of the bowl of soup. He felt that, under the circumstances, it would be best if he left. As he crawled across the tablecloth, he remembered the words of the prisoner in the dungeon. His regret that he did not look back at his daughter as he left her. And so, Roscuro turned back. He looked, and he saw that the princess was glaring at him. Her eyes were filled with disgust and anger. "Go back to the dungeon," was what the look she gave to him said. "Go back to the darkness where you belong." This look, reader, broke Roscuro's heart. Did you think that rats do not have hearts? Wrong. All living things have hearts. And the heart of any living thing can be broken. If the rat had not looked over his shoulder, perhaps his heart wouldn't have been broken, and it is possible then that I would not have this story to tell. But reader, he did look. Chapter 22. He puts his heart together again. Roscuro hurried from the banquet hall. "A rat," he said, and put his paw over his heart. "I am a rat, and there is no light for rats. There will be no light for me." The king's men were still bent over the queen. The king was still shouting, "Save her! Save her!" And the queen was still dead, of course, when Roscuro encountered the queen's royal soup spoon lying on the floor. I will have something beautiful, he said aloud. I am a rat, but I will have something beautiful. I will have a crown of my own. He picked up the spoon and put it on his head. I have a picture I'm going to try and show you. Can you see him there with the spoon on his head? Sorry if you can't. I think you can. So he takes his queen's spoon and put it on his head like a crown. Yes, said Roscuro, I will have something beautiful, and I will have revenge. Both things, somehow. There are those hearts, reader, that never mend again once they're broken. Or if they do mend, they heal themselves in a crooked and lopsided sort of way, as if sewn together by a careless craftsman. Such was the fate of Chiaroscuro. His heart was broken. Picking up the spoon and placing it on his head, speaking of revenge, these things helped him to put his heart together again. But it was, alas, put together wrong. Where is that rat? Shouted the king. Find that rat. If you want me, muttered Roscuro as he left the banquet hall, I will be in the dungeon, in the darkness. Chapter 23. Consequences. There were, of course, dire consequences of Roscuro's behavior. Every action, reader, no matter how small, has a consequence. That's a deep statement right there. Every action, no matter how small, has a consequence, and that's true in life. For instance, the young Roscuro gnawed on Gregory the jailer's rope, and because he gnawed on the rope, a match was lit in his face, and because a match was lit in his face, his soul was set afire. The rat's soul was set afire, and because of this, he journeyed upstairs, seeking the light. Upstairs in the banquet hall, the Princess P spotted him and called out the words, "Rat!" And because of this, Roscuro fell into the queen's soup. And because the rat fell into the queen's soup, the queen died. You can see, can't you, how everything is related to everything else? You can see quite clearly how every action has a consequence. For instance, if, reader, you will indulge me and allow me to continue this meditation on consequence. Because the queen died while eating soup, the heartbroken king outlawed soup. And because soup was outlawed, so were all the instruments involved in making and eating soup. Soup spoons, and bowls, and kettles. These things were collected from all the people of the kingdom of Dor, and they were piled in the dungeon. And because Roscuro was dazzled by the light of one match and journeyed upstairs and fell into the queen's soup, and the queen died, the king ordered the death of every rat in the land. The king's men went bravely into the dungeon to kill the rats. But the thing about killing a rat is that first you have to find the rat. And if a rat doesn't want to be found, reader, he will not be found. The king's men succeeded only in getting lost in the dungeon's tortuous mazes. Some of them, in fact, did not ever find their way out again and died there in the heart of the castle. And so, the killing of all the rats was not successful. And in desperation, King Philip declared that rats were illegal. He declared them outlaws. This, of course, was a ridiculous law, as rats are outlaws to begin with. How can you outlaw an outlaw? It is a waste of time and energy. But still, the king had officially decreed that all rats in the kingdom of Dor were outlaws and should be treated as such. When you're a king, you may make as many ridiculous laws as you like. That is what being a king is all about. But, reader, we must not forget that King Philip loved the queen and that without her, he was lost. This is the danger of loving. No matter how powerful you are, no matter how many kingdoms you rule, you cannot stop those you love from dying. Making soup illegal, outlawing rats, these things soothed the poor king's heart, and so we must forgive him. And what about the outlawed rats? What about one outlawed rat in particular? What about Chiaroscuro? In the darkness of the dungeon, he sat in his nest with the spoon atop his head. He set to work fashioning for himself a kingly cape made out of a scrap of the red tablecloth. And as he worked, old one-eared Botticelli Rimorso sat next to him, swinging his locket back and back and forth, saying, "You see what comes from a rat going upstairs? I hope that you have learned your lesson. Your job in this world is to make others suffer." "Yes," muttered Roscuro. "Yes, that is exactly what I intend to do. I will make the princess suffer for how she looked at me." And as Roscuro worked and planned, the jailer Gregory held tight to his rope and made his own way through the darkness. And in a dank cell, the prisoner who had once had a red tablecloth and now had nothing, spent his days and nights weeping quietly. High above the dungeon, upstairs in the castle, a small mouse stood alone one evening as his brothers and sisters sniffed for crumbs. He stood with his head cocked to one side, listening to a sweet sound he did not yet have a name for. There would be consequences of the mouse's love for music. You, reader, know already some of those consequences. Because of the music, the mouse would find his way to a princess, and he would fall in love. And speaking of consequences, the same evening that Despereaux stood inside the castle hearing music for the first time, outside the castle, in the gloom of dusk, more consequences drew near. A wagon driven by a king's soldier and piled high with spoons and bowls and kettles was making its way to the castle. And beside the soldier there sat a young girl with ears that looked like nothing so much as pieces of cauliflower stuck on either side of her head. The girl's name, reader, was Miggery Sow. And though she did not yet know it, she would be instrumental in helping the rat work his revenge. And that is the end of the second book. Tomorrow we will read Book the Third, Gore, the Tale of Miggery Sow. Please join me again tomorrow as we continue this book. I miss you. I love you. Please read something for your own enjoyment. It's so important. Love you. Bye.